千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. Here we are once again, everybody. I want to invite everyone to center yourself, to gain that Tao state of mind in participation for this process, where your energy together with everybody else will make this a special occasion. We will start out with a quick recap of what we discussed previously in the last meeting. Chapter 56 has a Chinese title, two titles, one primary title, and then an alternate. So as I mentioned last time, the name for this chapter is the Tao honored or the Tao valued. And the context is more honor than value. The three characters that you see here, the first character is the character for the Tao. The second character, the middle character, in this context means honor. You will see that in this chapter, toward the very end, this character is used in two different ways, two different contexts. Then the third character there is chapter. The alternative name, 真行章, is talking about the true travel, the true journey, the real journey, which means the real path of cultivation on the path of the Tao. So these are drawn from the content of the chapter itself. At the very end of this chapter, it talks about how those who possess a quality known as Mystic Oneness become honored by the entire world. So we'll work our way to that grand conclusion. So one thing to note is that this chapter is in the second half of the Daodejing. The first half of the Daodejing is Dejing, the classic about the Tao. The second half, what we are now at, from chapter 38 to chapter 81, is Dejing, the classic of virtue. The first half was focused on a true understanding of the Tao, and that would be 真知, real knowledge, real understanding, real comprehension. The second half, for which the alternative title has special meaning, is 真行, as you can see within the parentheses, and that is talking about a true practice of the Tao, true cultivation, truly being on the path, actions that are true to yourself, true to the Tao, hence true travel or true journey. So both chapter titles have a lot of meaning embedded in them. I am very happy to be able to present these Chinese titles to the gathering. So then let's take a look at the text that we talked about previously, and we had divided this up into three sections. And here's where the three sections are. This particular chapter has many repeating characters from one line to the next. So you can tell right off the bat from line 1 to 2, already we see two repeating characters. The middle two characters are the same. Then we have a bunch of lines, 6 lines, where the middle character is the same. And this is all part of the poetic structure of the original. Then in the third section, we have the 4 characters at the beginning of the line being the same. So the only exception there, line 10, has gu, the character gu, in front of it, which just means thus, so, therefore. So it's actually the same as the other lines. Then also notice that in the second section, all the lines are 3 characters except the last one in there, and that's the concluding line for that section. And in section 3, the last section, the last line is different in structure than the other lines. And that is again because it is a concluding line for that chapter, for that section, and also for the entire chapter. So that's how the overall structure looks like. And then we got into the line by line discussion. We started out with the first section that says, those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. And as I mentioned before, they are 知者不言, 言者不知. Alternatively, it can be 智者不言, 言者不知, where the first one is talking about the people who know, and the second pronunciation with a different pitch is talking about those who are wise, those who possess wisdom. So right off the bat, we're talking about a description where Laozi specifically is talking about how people who talk too much possess too little wisdom or know too little. We went into that a little bit, and then we also brought out other sages throughout history who were all studied the Tao at around the same time as Laozi, and who all expressed the teaching in their own way. Then we also got into the second section a little bit, where we talked about what these lines actually mean. They are highly metaphorical. They are not meant to be literal, and as we go through, we decrypt each line so they all kind of make complete sense separately and together. So let's do that quick recap now. First, we want to cover the first 2 lines. Those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. So Kongzi is Confucius, so the way to say his name is a little bit different. In Mandarin, Kongzi, sometimes Kongfuzi. Those are synonymous. They both refer to the same person. Kongfuzi is where Confucius came from, and that's the Latinized name that visiting missionaries, the ones who first brought back Chinese culture to Europe, they gave Kongfuzi the Latinized name Confucius, and it's stuck in our language ever since. So for this particular topic about talking, we heard not only from Kongzi, but also Mozi, another sage, another great philosopher from the Warring Stage period, just like Confucius. So Mozi, the other philosopher, used the metaphor of frogs versus rooster. So the point that he made is vivid and easily remembered, and that is the frogs croaked all day and nobody listens to them. The rooster calls out in the morning, as the day begins, and everybody listens to that. Everybody wakes up at around that time and started becoming active, started to go about their business in the morning. So the distinction, the contrast is clear. We want to be like the rooster, picking and choosing the proper time to call out, to speak up. In the Tao, it is not a virtue to be completely silent. It is a virtue to pick and choose the right time to say the right thing so that you will have maximal, optimal impact in what you're saying. We don't want to be like the frogs, and the observation from the Tao is that Most people are like the frogs. Most people do babble on too much, and they are not really paid attention to. They're not really listened to. So Confucius goes into details a little bit and talks about the do's and don'ts. So he pointed out that, again, it is not about complete silence. That is not a virtue in the Tao. What he was saying specifically is that if you should say something, but you do not, you've done something wrong. The person who could have benefited by something that you could have said, that didn't get a chance to hear you, well, you've done something wrong by that person. This could be, for instance, some home truths that a good friend needs to hear, but you hold your tongue for whatever reason, and you don't give him the blunt truth. Well, it's a disadvantage to him, and it's also a missed opportunity for you, and perhaps a dereliction of duty for yourself as a friend. Then the other part is probably more common in our lives, and that is, if there's something that can be offensive, misleading, untrue, you should not say it, but you say it anyway, well, you've spoken the wrong thing. You've spoken wrongly. So Confucius specifically points out the two cases to say that, well, sometimes you ought to speak up. Sometimes you ought to be quiet. If you vary from those, you are not being wise. If you are wise, you speak up when you should, and you remain quiet and listen when you should. So definitely, I think, something that we too often can forget as we interact with other people. Then, in the subsequent lines, I also cited Confucius. This one has two lines: close the mouth, shut the doors. Now, Kongzi, what he said about that, he used 4 different lines, and they actually cover not the 2 lines from the Daodejing. It's a little bit of a expanded version from the Tao teachings. He said, do not look at that which is improper. Do not listen to that which is improper. Do not speak of that which is improper. Do not act on that which is improper. Out of these 4, it's the third one, the third line, 非礼勿言, that corresponds to the line, close the mouth. That's strictly about communication, verbal communication. Then, the first 2 lines, do not look at that which is improper or listen to that which is improper. Those 2 correspond to shut the doors. The doors in the context of Laozi and the Daodejing represent the ears and the eyes. Therefore, they correspond to do not look at that which is improper and do not listen to that which is improper. Then that leaves us the 4th line, 非礼勿动, do not act on that which is improper. So this is beyond the scope of what Laozi was saying, but it's very definitely within scope of what the Tao teaching had been at the time. It is all about one's interactions with other people. And it's easy to see what they're driving at. If there's something that's private, that's confidential, that you should not be looking at, a true gentleman of the Confucian tradition, a Tao cultivator, would refrain from looking at it. In our modern world, this extends to the rubbernecking that we do while driving by the scene of an accident on the freeway. Frankly, many people do that because, they just can't get enough of the misfortune of other people. But a Tao cultivator will not be doing the same rubbernecking like everybody else. Now, as far as not listen to that which is improper, that covers a lot of ground. It's about malicious gossip. It is also about flattering remarks from other people. Now, most people, of course, love listening to that. Whether it's true or not, they want to hear something that sounds good, sort of like ear candy. But the Tao cultivator will stick to what is real and resist the flattery, or to have it generate no impact, no influence whatsoever. That is actually part of the practice for mystic oneness. And certainly when it comes to malicious rumors and gossip, the preference of the Tao cultivator is to not listen to that and not pass it on, which goes into do not speak of that which is improper. Those are the things, as I mentioned, that are offensive, that are untrue, that are misleading, etc. Then the last one, do not act on that which is improper. Actions. This can cover physical assault. It can cover theft, robbery, things that you should not do, you should refrain from doing. These are all part of the teachings from Kongzi. So then we are getting close to the end of the recap. We also talked about the beginning of the next section, which is also the beginning of our approach to the third important concept, and the most important concept in this chapter, and that is the concept of mystic oneness. In this slide that we talked about previously, you can see mystic oneness down below in line 9. This is called mystic oneness, and all these different things lead up to it. So I want to make sure that we gain total clarity on this particular concept. In order to get there, in this particular slide, you can see line 5 talks about blunting the sharpness. So as we marked previously, sharpness in this case is about the harsh words, sharp criticisms. A Tao cultivator wanting to be harmonious with other people, wanting to be gentle, would be blunting the sharpness, would not be trying to hurt people's feelings with sharp words. And oftentimes, when people are critical, when people are harsh, just like talking too much, it's yet another manifestation of the ego. And as Tao cultivators, I hope that all of us will be watching for this kind of harshness in ourselves. So that's one of the concepts that we covered leading up to mystic oneness. Another one is line 6. And this is where we begin to pick up on our discussion from before. Line 6 says, unravel the knots. I do actually want to spend a little bit of time on this today, because unraveling the knots, to untie the knots, this can be difficult to understand or accurately understood in the modern context. I do see translations that don't really do the original justice. You see, the knots represent complexity, complexities in life. And there are internal and external aspects to complexity. When we talk about internal complexity, that just means your thoughts are jumbled up, there's anxiety, there's internal confusion and disorientation. This may be because you are faced with something for which you are indecisive, for which there are complex considerations, so that you become confused. It could be that there are so many things that you have to keep track of that you feel overwhelmed. It could be that there are things that happen that are frustrating to you so that you feel upset, maybe even angry. All of these represent the internal kind of complexity. These become like knots in the mind, knots in your thoughts, that ideally one should be able to unravel, to untie. External complexity would be things like contention with other people, which tend to become very complex. Whenever there's any kind of argument, contentious behavior, it's usually what we call the he said, she said type of situation, where both sides accuse one another, casting blame, pointing fingers, and they become ever more entrenched in their position. What they say about each other can rapidly become very difficult to unpack. So that's why the knot symbolizes complexity. It can be mental complexity. It can be a dispute with other people. And oftentimes we have similar expressions on our side using English in the West. For instance, we may say that someone is tied up with multiple lawsuits. When we say someone is tied up, well, that's a rope metaphor. That's knots. So let me bring that up as a bullet item there. For instance, contentious entanglements with litigation. So how do we simplify? How do we streamline? How do we undo the complexity? That's the main question, right? So the bullet point representing that, Tao cultivators cut to the chase and simplify matters. That's what the Tao is supposed to be all about. The Tao mind, using the oneness of the Tao, the unity of purpose, has a powerful effect in naturally reducing complexity to reduce everything back to the simplicity of the one. And that's what I mean by the next bullet here. Tao cultivators hold on to Tao principles and original purpose. So this line, because of the internal and external aspects, has an explanation, has meaning that is well beyond what the characters themselves suggest, and is usually not conveyed by translations. So what I want to do is I would like to use a story to illustrate unravel the knots. And I want to focus on the internal aspects. That seems to be the one that most of us are concerned about, because one has to be able to streamline and simplify internally before one has the ability to bring about that unifying simplicity to other people. So the internal streamlining is the most important. So let me share a story with everyone. This story is called The Potted Orchid. So once upon a time in ancient China, there was an old sage living at a monastery. He had a potted orchid that he tended to every day. He loved it. He would water it. He would nurture. He would make sure that the potted orchid could get plenty of sun every day so that it could thrive. So one day, he needed to be away for a few hours. So he knew he wasn't going to have enough time to do the care of the orchid as he normally would. he asked his two young disciples to take care of it. He entrusted the care of the orchid to the two young disciples. And he said, please be especially careful in watering the orchid and moving it around to catch more sunlight. Please be careful. Now, the two disciples were perhaps too young, too rash. They heard the sage, but they didn't really listen. They were distracted, they were careless, and they also wanted to claim credit for taking good care of the orchid. So they pushed each other out of the way to do this particular chore. One of them said to the other, out of my way, I'm going to take care of the orchid. The other one pushed him back. No, you get out of my way. I'm going to do it. And in that shoving back and forth, one of the young disciples bumped against the flower stand where the potted orchid was. It came tumbling down, crashing to the ground, was instantly smashed. This was the unfortunate sight that greeted the old sage when he returned. His precious potted orchid ruined on the ground. And the two young disciples were busy blaming each other, arguing, you pushed me, that's why this happened. No, you started it. You were the one that pushed me first. No, you did. Pointing fingers back and forth. When they saw the sage returning, they quieted down, but they still glared at one another with the dagger eyes of blame. Now, they expected the sage to be angry about this, perhaps even rage, because they knew how much he cared about the orchid. They also knew that it was their mistake. So perhaps there would be punishment. What the two young disciples did not expect was that the old sage remained as calm as ever. So instead of scolding, punishing them, he just started picking up the pieces, which they hadn't done yet. So they were amazed and surprised. And they could not contain their curiosity. They asked the old sage, Master, why are you not more upset? Why are you not angry? The old sage turned to them and he said, very simply, he said, well, my original purpose with this plant was to nurture something, make it live and thrive, so that I would be able to calm the mind and contemplate the wonder of the Tao, the nurturing essence of life. That was my original purpose. My purpose was not to have a reason to get upset. Getting angry now would not serve my original purpose. So why should I get angry? The end. I wanted to use this story to illustrate this idea that when you keep in mind, when you remember, when you recall the original purpose of anything, that very oftentimes has a simplifying effect. It has an effect to cut through the complexities so that you can arrive at a place of peace. So what I want to do is to bring that to your attention and to suggest that this has ramifications to different situations in life. Now, this is actually a story that comes from one of my books that's related to one of my entries in one of my books. Let me show you what that is. From the Tao of Joy Every Day. Now, the story itself does not appear in it, but in day 56 from the book, the Tao of Joy Every Day, it actually speaks to very to this very topic. When I wrote it, I did not check against the chapter number of the Daodejing to make it match. Because after all, there are only 81 chapters in the Daodejing, and there are 365 days, and therefore 365 entries in the book. So there is a coincidence, synchronicity, where day 56 in the book is exactly about this topic. So day 56, to paraphrase, talks about how for all of us, life can have challenging moments. Isn't that the truth? Sometimes, just like the old sage, you can find yourself in a situation that can potentially annoy, can be upsetting, can make you angry. So when that happens, it can be very useful to take a mental step back, to review the situation, and just like the old sage, ask yourself if the negative emotions, the complexity, the overwhelming anxieties, negative thoughts, are they consistent with your original purpose? This can be as common a situation as when you're driving, when you're on the road and there are people who are driving poorly or rudely or not considerate to other drivers. It can be very irritating when you find yourself in a situation like that. So applying this idea to that driving scenario, you may want to consider that your original purpose for driving is to gain greater freedom and mobility to take yourself to places that are too far away for walking. That's the original purpose. The original purpose was not to put yourself in a situation that can irritate you, upset you, or anger you. So you can dismiss that irritation, the possible annoyance, as something that simply is distracting you from your original purpose. So what about more personal interactions? What about with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers? There's going to be times when you find yourself disappointed, right? When you find yourself let down by someone. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. So imagine that this scenario occurs at work and some coworker did not hold up his end, and that's causing a cascade of other problems. Of course, that can be annoying, that can be frustrating, that can lead to anger and the finger pointing in blame and accusation, etc. So if that is the case, when you find yourself in that particular scenario, consider, hey, what is the original purpose here? What is my original purpose for working? Well, come to think of it, the original purpose was to make a living for myself, my loved ones, to build a secure future for me and my family. That was the original purpose. It is not to seek out opportunities to be frustrated or disappointed. That's not the original purpose. So with that in mind, the simplifying effect is that you can dismiss the disappointment as something that hinders you, that gets in the way of you achieving your original purpose. So this is useful to remember whenever you are at the beginning stage of a darker moods coming on. What is the original purpose? When you can keep that in mind, it is much easier to remain calm and level-headed. Why? Because you are in touch with the unity of purpose, with the oneness of the Tao. That is what gives you clarity and appreciation for life. It helps you keep your focus. So that's the story about the Potted Orchid, meant to complement that page 56 or day 56 from the book. It's about unraveling the knots. And let me just reiterate for everyone's benefit that the knots represent complexity in our lives and also contention among people. I said that it could be internal or external. The complexity when it comes to contention among people will be external. Complexity when it comes to thoughts that are confused and jumbled up, that will be internal. So the more complicated things get, the more confused and annoyed we tend to be. That confusion, that annoyance can so easily transform into much more negative emotions, the anger and rage, as I mentioned. So to reduce that complexity, to get it back down to the simple, what we can do, first, we need to calm things down. So externally, if it's a contentious situation, to lower the temperature, that means getting everybody back to common ground. You know, hey guys, we're all in this together. If it's the workplace, we're all trying to accomplish something. We need to work as a team. The common ground that you seek that can bring about an area of agreement for everybody involved, that has the effect of lowering the temperature. What if it's internal? What if it's just within yourself that you have these complex thoughts that threaten to overwhelm your peace of mind? Well, it would be time to center your mind, center yourself, take deep breaths, take a mental step back to review the situation from a detached perspective, a technique that we talk about quite a bit in these talks. So that is the internal way of attaining calmness and also to lower your temperature internally. Then it will be time to reflect on the key questions. And this is both internal and external. The idea is that you want to ask yourself, what are the Tao principles that apply here? What can I use from the things that I've been studying? Then you also want to, again, ask yourself the question, so what was the original purpose? Why are we getting distracted with all these other considerations? What that original purpose is, if I hang on to it, it will help me unravel the knots. So that is the way to use the Tao. So having done that illustration, we are now going to be continuing our line-by-line discussion of the Daodejing. So line 6 was all about unraveling the knots, to untie the knots, loosen up the knots. Line 7 is dim the glare. So here, glare is metaphoric. The last character in line 7 is guang. Guang means bright light, brilliant light. It represents mental brilliance. So we want to dim that light. Here's why. Ego-driven people hog the spotlight. We know this. We've seen this. And what they do, you know, they may be mentally brilliant, but they're turning that brilliance into a glare that makes people uncomfortable. In other words, they want to show off. They want to impress you with how smart, how bright they are. And Tao cultivators are quite the opposite. So having known many of you over the years, I know the following for a fact. I know that Tao cultivators may be quite brilliant themselves, as many of us are in this gathering. However, Tao cultivators, despite being brilliant, will refrain from shining their light into people's eyes because it will make people uncomfortable. So this is a description of a natural humility, a down-to-earth personality, someone who was easy to get along with. That's a primary characteristic of a Tao cultivator. They dim the glare. So the metaphor is bright light representing mental brilliance. Now, today in the West, oftentimes we talk about the light bulb goes on, meaning that you get sudden comprehension or an idea, something occurs to you, so a light bulb goes on. So we're no stranger to the metaphor of using light to represent mental thoughts, brilliant ideas. In ancient times, they didn't have light bulbs in ancient China, obviously, but they did have light because of the mastery of fire. So they could also use the metaphor quite easily. Let's continue on. Look at the next line here. Mix the dust. This is a straightforward translation of line 8. Let's move on to that line. 同其尘. Let me highlight again the last character there. 尘. It means dust. So in Mandarin, you would say 灰尘 when you want to say dust, where 灰 is ash. The two together, 灰尘 means dust. But 尘 by itself also means dust, but it means more than just the dust that you clean around the house. Dust is metaphoric, just like the other expressions that we have seen, like using light to represent mental brilliance. We're using dust here to represent the material world, because for sure there is a lot of dust in the material world. Seems like a never-ending supply of dust. Things get dusty. If you don't clean them on a regular basis, they get very dusty. So dust has a long tradition in Eastern thought. Whether you're talking about the Tao, or you're talking about Buddhist thought, dust is always used as a metaphor for the material world. So mix the dust in this case, you would logically assume that it means that you want to mix with the world. You will be correct. To mix the dust is to be part of the world. So this is why I keep saying, ever since we started doing this, I keep saying that the Tao is not like the depiction in movies, in television shows, not at all. The Tao is very much engaged with the world. It is very much part of the world, not apart from it. So to be involved with the world, in this case, specifically means being involved in, engaged with the community, people. So there again, the depiction that we've had from before is that Tao cultivators may be like hermits that they live far away from civilization. They don't want to be disturbed. They want to have peace out in the middle of nature. When the reality is the actual Tao cultivators, the actual sages, live among people. They may even be invisible among the many people that they mix with. And this is because with the people, that is the best way to cultivate the Tao. Actively helping other people, actively providing assistance, guidance when necessary. It's all about being with people, not away from people. So there's quite a bit more we need to say about this. There's also a well-known metaphor that goes along with it beyond dust. There's another metaphor associated with it that depicts the thinking and the nature of the Tao cultivator, the spiritual seeker. Someone who can be part of the world, engage with the community, but not get all dusty and dirty. Not get all dusty just because you mix with the dust. So I want to talk more about that. I see that we have reached the halfway point in our meeting today. So I want to suggest that we go ahead and take a 5-minute break. When we come back, I'd like to delve deeper into this other metaphor associated with dust to talk about how we should regard ourselves in terms of our connection, relationship with the material world. So I mentioned that I want to make sure everyone gets an additional metaphor that is very common in Eastern thought. Let me share that with everybody. This is having to do with this whole idea of mix the dust or mixing with the dust where the dust is the material world. In the West, we do have this expression that for someone on a spiritual path, whatever that path may be, could be a religious tradition, could be just spiritual teachings. The idea is to be in the world, the material world, and yet not of the world. That is, keep in mind our essential spiritual nature, that we can be a participant in the world, but not be mired or trapped in the world. In Eastern traditions, there is a great metaphor to talk about that. It is the lotus flower. This is the reason why you oftentimes see or hear mention of lotus, especially as it is associated with Asian traditions or possibly Buddhist thought. This is because of the observation that the beautiful lotus flower grows out of mud. The flower itself is pure and beautiful, and yet it grew out of mud that is neither. This becomes a metaphor for a spiritual person who can interact with the world, to grow in the mud, out of the mud, and yet be untouched, untainted by the mud, unaffected by the mud. If you extend that to what we're talking about, what it basically says is that one can be mixing the dust, to mix with the dust, the material world, but not all get all dirty and dusty. So specifically, there's a couple of lines. 出世不离世，入尘不染尘. Let me explain. Here's the translation. Renounce the world without leaving the world. Enter into the dust without getting dusty. So these are the two lines. 出世, the first two characters, on the surface appear to mean to exit the world. But what it actually means is it is similar to 出家, which in the Buddhist tradition means someone decides to follow the path of a monk. Here, 出世, it doesn't mean that you become a practicing Buddhist monk. It really just means that you decide to renounce the world in the context of you being able to see through the illusory nature of the world. That is, you have attained a degree of spiritual understanding. So you can do that. You can see through the material world, understand that there's not a whole lot you need to be attached to because it's all illusory anyway. You can do that with the world without leaving the world. You're still a part of it. You're just not attached to it. I hope that makes it clear. Then the second line is a straight reference to dust. Enter into the dust, same idea. Come into this world, be involved and engaged in everything that is happening. You can be part of it without attracting dust, getting dusty, without being affected by material pursuits so that you become materialistic yourself. So the meaning is clear, I hope. What it says is that you can be in the material world, you can tend to all of your worldly needs, you can have worldly possessions. There are no requirements really that you have to give up all of your worldly possessions. The only thing is, when you are able to see through the world, you will naturally want to let go of what you do not need while holding on to the necessities of life. Hence, you fully participate in the world, contribute to the world without becoming attached to it. So that, I think, is a powerful metaphor. In the Tao, in Eastern thoughts, Eastern traditions, to help you strike the right balance in the spiritual with the material in our daily lives. Because of the importance of this concept, the importance of these lines that we're talking about, blunts the sharpness, unravel the knots, dim the glare, mix the dust, I want to share with you that these 4 lines in chapter 56 are actually a repeat of 4 lines from a previous chapter from the very beginning of the Daodejing, from the beginning part of the Daodejing. So these 4 lines from 56 are exactly the same as the same 4 lines from chapter 4. Let me show you what that looks like. So in 56 that we're studying now, we've got the 4 lines, as you see here. These 4 lines refer to those who are wise, those who possess mystic oneness, the Tao cultivators, the advanced cultivators of the Tao. So in translation, you have to make the verbal tense agree with the subject, which is plural. In chapter 4, notice that the Chinese characters are exactly the same. No difference. But remember, Chinese is contextual. So in chapter 4, it's talking about the Tao, and that's singular. So in English, we have grammatical rules not present in Chinese, and therefore, that's the reason the translation is a little bit different. It's due to grammar. And reason is, again, the underlying reason is that in 56, it's a reference to Tao cultivators, those who possess the mystic virtue. In chapter 4, the references are to the Tao itself, which is singular. Let's move on. So at the end of all this, we get to玄同, 2 characters, mystic oneness. Let's break them down. Xuan. Xuan is one of the commonly mistranslated characters in English translations of the Daodejing. Xuan has been translated as dark, which has sort of a sinister context in English. Xuan actually means mysterious, mystical, that which is inexplicable, that you cannot easily figure out. Even in modern Chinese, people will use this character to express exactly that. when they see something that is difficult to figure out, they may say, 很玄, very 玄, very mysterious. So that's what it means. It doesn't mean dark. It had the meaning dark in ancient times only because in darkness it is hard to see anything. So 玄, the tangential meaning that it's difficult to see. Even in English, we have the dual context there of being difficult to perceive visually, difficult to see, and difficult to see in terms of difficult to understand. That's the reason for the confusion. And the translations that get it wrong really don't have a grasp of the ancient context. Let's move on to the second character. 同. 同 is unity, togetherness, oneness, being together. When we put Da, the character for great, in front of it, 大同 is the great unity. It's the great commonwealth for humanity, an ideal state where everyone is together, everybody is equal, and living harmoniously together. So 同 has a very significant meaning embedded into the very character itself. When you put the two things together, 玄同, mystic oneness, mysterious, inexplicable, metaphysical kind of oneness, you're talking about oneness with everything. A state of spiritual oneness with everything. It's like that old joke about the monk approaching the hot dog stand. Make me one with everything. Make me a hot dog with everything. Make me one with everything as a pun about mystic oneness. So like the Tao, to be one with everything, it is something that cannot be fully explained with words. However, by looking at this particular chapter, 56, we can see how to reach the state of mystic oneness. Everything that we have studied so far in chapter 56 provides a nice recipe, a nice prescription of the steps that we need to take to get from here to there, to get from where we are to the state of mystic oneness. So those can be distilled into the 6 principles of mystic oneness. So I'd like to run through them with you, make sure everybody's on the same page in regards to how we can attain mystic oneness. So the question, how can we attain mystic oneness? 玄同. In this particular chapter, we started out with the 2 lines. Those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know. So simply, just from the first line, you can see what Laozi is trying to get at. So principle number 1, we should talk less to know more and be wiser. So as I mentioned previously, 知者, those who know, can also be 智者, a different pitch, meaning the ones who possess wisdom, the wise ones. So if we don't talk so much, we have more mental energy to devote to listening and learning. Therefore, we can know more and be wiser. So this is not groundbreaking wisdom. This is wisdom common to all of humanity, East and West. There are many sages and philosophers throughout history, East and West, that have talked about this and expressed it in a variety of different ways. So there is one quote that I want to share from Western traditions. This is from philosopher Zeno of Citium, actually going back pretty much as far as Laozi and the other ancient Chinese philosophers. So what he said was, of course, in ancient Greek, and it translates to We have 2 ears, but 1 mouth, so that we may hear more, but speak less. So exactly the same idea. We should talk less to know more and be wiser. And there's a couple of different ways to look at this as well. Here's something that I want to share with you that's really kind of fun. I want to show you 2 different words. 2 different words. The first word is silent. So I think everyone understands what silent means. It's an easy word to comprehend. Then I want to show you the second word. Listen. Then I want to point out that silent and listen, these 2 words are made up of the exact same letters. So I have purposely typed them out in this way that you see in the slides, with a little break in between. That's because I want to make it easy for you to visually compare the 2 words, the 2 parts. Each word contains 6 alphabets. And then you can see that each part, the first half and the second half, is just a rearrangement. So the 2 words, despite having different meaning, are composed of the exact same letters. Coincidence? Synchronicity? Perhaps. But this can have a nice suggestion for us. It can mean for us that the silence of the Tao, the silent Tao, does not mean a complete absence of communication. It doesn't mean that you shut down, that you block yourself off from other people. Rather, silence and listen can be 2 parts of the same coin. It can mean being receptive, quieting down in order to listen and hear what's really going on. So I want to share that with you. I think it's a good reminder. And this applies to the second line there. Those who talk do not know. And that's because when they talk, they're not silent. Therefore, they cannot listen in order to know. Then I want to point out that line 3, which you now see in the slide, line 3, close the mouth, is actually just another reiteration of the first 2 lines. You know, those who talk do not know, those who know do not talk. It's the same directive, another way to emphasize the importance of quieting down. It is so important that Lao Tzu used up 3 lines to talk about the same thing, that all go into principle number 1, talk less to know more and be wiser. Let's move on from that idea into the other concepts presented by Lao Tzu. Let's move on to line 4. So I mentioned previously that shut the doors means to shut the door on temptations and distractions. And previously, I used the example of the 3 frogs and the 4 monkeys. So the 3 frogs, as you can see, is to, in Confucian terms, it would be to not see, hear, or speak of that which is improper. And then the 4 monkeys adds the 4th Confucian idea that you should not act on, your hands should not act on that which is improper. So all of these have a unifying concept, and that is temptations, distractions are improper, they get in the way. They do more bad than good, and therefore it's a good idea to wisely refrain from everything that is improper. Hence, shutting the doors leading to temptations and distractions. So then, moving on from here, we've got line 5, blunt the sharpness. This is actually a reiteration as well. To blend the sharpness means to be gentle and harmonious in your interactions with people. Now, those of you who have been listening for a while, you may recall that in the previous chapter, chapter 55, one of the major takeaways was about harmony. Harmony being the foundation that once you establish harmony within, it leads to your harmonious interactions with other people, such as members of your family and the people you come across every day. That leads to your understanding of the Tao, which is called constancy. And understanding of the Tao of constancy leads to clarity, spiritual clarity, which is enlightenment, what the Buddhists would call spiritual enlightenment. So it's a progression that goes from harmony to constancy to clarity. From that progression, you can see that it is the harmony is the foundation for everything that follows, eventually taking you all the way to enlightenment or awakening of the inner Buddha. So that's our third principle. Let's move on to the next one. Then we get back to the discussion that we had about resolving complexities, untying or letting loose the knots of complexities. And here I want to remind everyone with the Potted Orchid. So the central idea, when you look at the orchid, I think you remember, we can cut through contention and complexity by holding on to the original intent, what I called the original purpose. That has a simplifying effect. It'll help us cut through all the complexities, so to get us back to calmness and peace. So that's number 4. Let's move on to number 5. Be naturally humble with everyone. Here, I want to remind everybody that the light bulb, or in ancient times, just a bright light. In ancient times, that bright lights could come from a torch or could come from the sun. But whether it's ancient times or modern times, the idea is the same. Mental brilliance can be compared to a light. That mental brilliance can be a glare. When you utilize mental brilliance as a way to intimidate other people, it's a glare that makes people uncomfortable. When you dim the glare, that means you become naturally humble. You can still be mentally brilliant, but you dim the glare in order to not blind other people with their brilliance. Why? Because there is no need, and it gets in the way of harmonious interactions, plus it's a manifestation of the ego. Let's then talk about the last one, number 6. Get actively involved with life and people. And that just means community. You don't want to be distant, aloof. You want to be right there with everybody. And the metaphor for that is the beautiful, pure lotus flower that grows out of mud. You can be spiritual while still interact completely, fully with everything the material world has to offer. So these are the 6 principles of Mystic Oneness. I want to present them to you as an important way to distill the teachings from this chapter, and that can be practically applied to life. Now we can continue with the rest of Daodejing 56. We're now on line 10. This begins a series of descriptions about the people who have attained mystic oneness. Now we know that those at a higher level, they become very spiritual but there's also practical implications about life. They act in a different way. They behave in a different way. So Laozi describes how they are. Basically, Laozi says, most people are susceptible to influence in a lot of different ways. But those who have attained a higher level, those who have mystic oneness, are immune from those different ways of influence. We start out with line 10. They cannot obtain this and be closer. On the face of it, it's difficult to understand, but let me break it down into two halves. Obtain this means to attain mystic oneness. Be closer, that's one of the ways to influence someone. Let's break it down. So those who attain mystic oneness are at a higher level, not just spiritually, but also in terms of their interactions with the world. They can do so at a higher level. They are not affected by the typical methods of persuasion, of influence. So let's focus on the word closer. Note that people often use flattery to get closer to someone. You like the person who says nice things about you, they draw closer, they become an ally or a friend. And by using flattery to get closer to someone, it becomes a method of influence. The target will listen to you once you draw close enough. However, those with mystic oneness are people who transcend the ordinary. Therefore, ordinary methods don't work. It is said that flattery will get you everywhere. With most people, that is definitely true. With higher level spiritual people, it is not true. Higher level Tao cultivators who have attained mystic oneness, for them, flattery will get you nowhere with them. It is of no use for you to try to get closer to them with flattery. Why not? Because they have mastered the ego. They know about themselves. They don't need flattering words. Plus, they see right through the illusions that words can weave together. That's why the attempt to get closer through flattery will fall flat, has no effect. The other methods are similar. So using that as our template, you can begin to understand all the other lines in this section. Let's go to 11. It says, as you can see here, they cannot obtain this and be distant. So again, obtain this is the attainment of mystic oneness. Distant is the opposite method of closer. So remember, closer is the method of influence where you use flattery to get close to someone. Distance is the very opposite. It would be methods of distance in terms of alienation and exclusion. It's a manipulation of the target by excluding them, alienating them, keeping them out, then opening the possibility of reversing that situation. So, example, for teenagers, remember high school? It's all about the exclusive cliques, hanging out with the cool kids, the popular kids, the in crowd. And in the adult world, for people climbing the social ladder, for society, it's about things like exclusive invitation-only associations, perhaps the country club membership. Again, the in crowd. And when it comes to advertising, it's about the lure of high society. If you are able to get a particular product that it is implied is membership or entry into an exclusive world. So I think you can see how this works. It's not about drawing closer. It's about keeping someone distant and then opening up the lure of being allowed in. That's the methods of distance. Now, this also fails with high-level Tao cultivators, those who possess the mystic virtue, the mystic oneness, pardon me, and it's for similar reasons. They have mastered their ego. They know who they are. They see right through the illusions that words can weave together. So it doesn't work. Whether you try to get closer to them or become more distant from them, neither method can work on them. Let's move on to line 12. I think you can see how this works. So they cannot obtain this and be benefited. Okay, well, now we know obtain this means the attainment of mystic oneness. And then the last character, Li. This is the character for benefit. It's about greed, one of the most common methods of influence. You know, it's not about flattery. It's not about exclusion. It's about, hey, how about if I bribe you with some money? Nice and direct. How much would it cost to buy you? So we often see it in our world as people who compromise their values for money. That's where the bribery part can come in. There's also another part, and that is note the long lines that people get into just to save a few bucks, or how they go out of their way, how they twist themselves into pretzel shapes just to be able to hoard goods or save a few bucks. Money is also the common factor there. So it's not just about getting money, like in bribery, it's also about saving money. Now, as you can imagine, this also would not work on those who have the high attainment of mystic oneness. And this is because, well, first of all, it's a character and integrity issue. They cannot be bought. They're not for sale. Secondly, the other equally important reason is that those who have attained a high level in the Tao, it isn't that they are physically, materially poor, but spiritually rich. No, that's not the Tao. In the Tao, those who attain a high level are not just spiritually self-sufficient, but also materially self-sufficient, or what we would normally call financially independent. That's why they cannot be tempted with benefits. So the pursuit of affluence, prosperity, is not necessarily in conflict with the pursuit of spirituality. That is the message. Now let's take a look at line 13. They cannot obtain this and be harmed. So this is the last set that we'll go over, and then we will jump to our conclusion, our summary for today. Here, it is also about mystic oneness. Here, the last character is to harm. So this is the opposite of benefit, which is the previous character there, the last character of line 12. To harm is using fear to influence someone. This means threats of possible harm. It's a fear-based method. So not bribery anymore, but hey, if you don't do what I tell you, you're going to be hurt. That type of thing. Now, whether it's greed or fear, these methods of influence do not work on those with mystic oneness. Why not? Because They possess the courage that comes naturally from compassion. This is an important teaching from the Tao, that true courage comes from compassion. It does not come from bragging. It does not come from the ego. And those with mystic oneness have the foresight to navigate away from those who would intimidate or threaten with violence. So very important. When you are better with the Tao, you begin to see all kinds of things because you possess clarity, not only on spiritual issues, but also on worldly situations. So this is another set. We talked about benefits and harm in this case, and then we also talked about other ways of influencing someone. We talked about getting closer to becoming distant, all methods of persuasion or influence. So there's a little more to this that we're going to have to cover next time. I think that we're running out of time in our meeting today, so we're going to have to jump to the summary. So how do we apply the Daodejing? How do we apply these teachings? Last time, we talked about those who know do not talk, those who talk do not know, so that we spoke about how to live in the Tao, starting with the self-discipline, starting with wisdom, going on to suggesting that the natural quietness of the Tao is better for all of us. The more you understand, the less you feel you need to tell everyone about what you know. And then we can use this teaching, not just for ourselves, but also to observe other people. We can tell who knows a lot, the ones who stay quiet and just observe, and we can tell who doesn't really know much at all, those who cannot shut up. So what about the summary for today? Here they are again, the 6 principles of mystic oneness. So I think these are such valuable guidelines for how to live that I want to turn them into one single slide in the summary page and to review them with you before we close for the day. The first one, remember, talk less to know more and be wiser. Always a good idea, and we have now seen this repeated many, many times throughout the Daodejing. Number 2, shut the door on temptations and distractions. And why? Because we need to focus on what is truly important in life. Number 3, be gentle and harmonious in your interactions. Do not turn on the glare. Do not be sharp and critical and harsh with other people. Be gentle and harmonious. And as you saw in chapter 55, it leads to constancy and clarity. Number 4, resolve complexities by holding on to the Tao. So my reminder here for everyone is that complexities can manifest internally or externally. Either way, you can resolve complexities, you can untie or loosen up the knots by holding on to the Tao. And the question to ask is, what is my original purpose? What is the oneness of my intent that I can use to simplify all this complexity out of existence? Number 5, be naturally humble with everyone. You can see this is connected to item number 3, being gentle and harmonious. Naturally humble plays into that. And this is where you don't want to try to impress everybody with your mental brilliance. Lastly, number 6, be actively involved with your community, with other people, with life itself. So in the genuine Tao that we're talking about here, there's no leaving civilization. There's no leaving people behind. That's not the Tao. That's just a distorted version, the misconception of the Tao. our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.